Okay, welcome back. We're going to move on to the next tutorial, what we'll call Warehouse 05E. So let's maybe change that up here. File, down to Properties. Remember now you have to have the Rename Building Properties checkbox ticked in the options. If you don't, that's grayed out and you won't be able to change it. So let's just delete what's there, put in 05E, and this time it's 05E Workbooks. Workbook, and this is the second, I suppose, tutorial in workbook utilization in Costex, because the first one we did the substructure, whereby we used our dimensions from substructure takeoff in the substructure workbook or substructure element of the workbook. In this case, I'm going to move on now to exterior walls, interior walls, etc. So once I've done that, I click update. So I've kept now a copy. Obviously, you want to export 05D before you do that, and keep a kind of an iterative copy as you go along from stage to stage, just like I'm giving you in the tutorials on Brightspace. So what we're going to do now is we're going to import in a workbook that we can use the descriptions from that workbook for our dimensions. So we've taken off our dimensions, now we're going to utilize them in a bill of quantities. We're going to start with exterior walls. The exterior walls, we're going to utilize obviously what we measured here in terms of first floor and ground floor, external walls, the concrete beam. And we're also going to utilize the exterior wall completions, which is our windows and doors. Why do we need to do that? Well, we need to deduct out the openings from our walls. Now, we could have done that in the actual dimensions as a negative dimension, and I might show you how to do that as well. But it's probably just as easy to drag and drop the total area over and deduct out your takeoff from your exterior wall completions, so your windows and doors. I'll leave it up to yourselves to make the judgment on that, which is easier. But we'll get going on the workbook right now. So we need to go from dimension view to workbook view, and I have it already done here. You will just see warehouse. So just take a look at that first. Maybe we put the substructure in there, and then that was what we populated in terms of our substructure. Now, just to give you a heads up, we did that by just copying and pasting descriptions in from Excel. This time around, we're going to actually import in an Excel workbook. So how do we do that? Well, let's take a quick look at the Excel workbook first. I have shared with you this on Brightspace. It's called Elements Quantity DK1. And you can see across the bottom here, we've got a number of different tabs for different elements. So from element 19, I think, through element 28. Now, as I said, we've done element 19 already. These tabs obviously are divided per element, with column A, column B, column C, D, and E. So it's formatted in such a way that it can be imported quite easily. So elements per tab, and then I suppose there's a space between each description, and the descriptions aren't merged across cells. They're pretty simply just in column B. A would be, I suppose, your code, C is your quantity, and D is your unit rate. So quantity is blank, the unit is in there, but the rate is blank as well. So just be conscious of that and how that comes in. See the way I don't have that particular description? It's not merged to be within there. It's unmerged, unwrapped. So it just makes it a little bit easier to import. So there may be a bit of processing that needs to happen prior to the importing of your bill of quantities from Excel into the Costex workbook that makes it that little bit easier to import. So I'm just going to close that down for the moment. I don't need it. I'm also going to open up the element 21 exterior walls that you did with Ficra. Not that you're going to need this as such, but it just gives me an indication as I go through it, and you an indication of what you measured manually and how your on-screen measurement compares to that. So flick back to Costex. Let's go ahead and import this in. Now ignore what I have there because you aren't going to have that. That's just, I had it done already, and I probably use that one. So what you'll do is you'll click Workbooks, Add, little drop down here, scroll all the way down to, it's not a new workbook. I'm going to import the workbook from Excel. Click that. Scroll to where you saved that. It's on Brightspace. You would have downloaded it and put it in a folder. It's called Elements Quantity DK1, and you're going to click Open. So in comes in this kind of interface here. You might have to check or uncheck what you want to bring in. I don't need a substructure. I had already done that. I'm going to bring in those 4 other elements, external wall through 28 frames. Make sure that the first column is going to be column A. So that's the control column, the code column. And the description column then is in column B, if you can remember when we looked at that Excel workbook. Import the blank rows, that's fine. Make sure that the use worksheet tabs is checked. That means that each tab will get a separate element rather than it all being in one element as a script, so to speak. Level 2, you don't need to have anything in there. Match formatting, don't worry about that. So the level 1, make sure that's checked. Then you need to go up to preview. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to make sure our row, that's okay, level's okay, B, yes, our descriptions will be in column B. Column C will be our quantity. Column D, I'm going to right click. If it doesn't have unit beside it, for column D, you'll right click and you'll make sure it's unit. Now it's already assigned, so it's going to give me that little bit of an error. If there's another column and you had quantities in there, you would click, right click, quantity, right click, rate, whatever it needed to be in terms of what it is. But because we had a blank cell for C, or a blank column for C in terms of the quantity, I won't see a quantity unit in there, or sorry, a quantity application to the unit. So description, unit, right click, make sure that it knows it's unit, and then you can go and import. So let's have a look at what the import looks like. Click import. So what it's done, spelled a couple of things wrong. What it's done is it imported each one of those tabs in as individual elements, which is essentially what I wanted to do. Where's the descriptions? Well, they're in the subtotal by double clicking subtotal or double clicking the number 1. So let's take a quick look. There we have our descriptions, imported description B, C quantity, and what I assigned there in terms of units. So you need to do that little right click thing to assign what column is what, otherwise it doesn't quite come in correctly. So as I said, I had already this done. I'm going to flick back to it. So we're going to start with our exterior walls element, and we're going to start populating it from our dimensions. Now it would be handy if I had 2 screens, but because I'm showing you this in a pre-recorded lecture, it all has to be done on one screen. So there's a bit of back and forth between my dimension view and my workbook view. As I said, if you had 2 screens, you'd be just flicking between the 2 screens, which is great, but unfortunately we can't do it when we're doing an on-screen lecture like this. So let's double click into our exterior walls. What we got here is the descriptions that we have in that Excel spreadsheet that you're using with FICRA. The first item or items that we have is the in situ concrete ring beam to the exterior walls. So there it is there, those first few items. So where's that? If I click dimensions, click the section, you can see right here on the inner leaf of the exterior wall, well, certain parts of the building, and we'll look at that where that was with this in situ concrete beam. That is in situ, which will need formwork and reinforcement, and obviously the concrete. From, I suppose, a takeoff point of view, where did I measure it? I measured it with, let's scroll up. There it is there. In fact, I think I measured it in the last tutorial. So I measured it as a length, but obviously assigned a width and a height, which calculates it as a volume, along with all the other secondary quantities I measured with it, be it formwork or reinforcement. So that's where the beam is. It goes from here to here and from here to here on the other side. Just a kind of reinforcement of what's above, gives the actual structural properties of the building. Click back to workbook. You won't be doing as much flicking back and forth as I would do. I'm just giving you a heads up where these things are, just for reminder purposes more than anything else. So the first item is the actual concrete to the beam. Well, there it is there. All I'm going to do is push down my left click button, hold it, keep holding it, drag and drop it over to the cell I want to release it into, and release it. Okay, so it's going to go in as a volume because that's essentially what it is here. So that's fine, and click update. Now, it's not actually 1 meters cubed. If I hover over, I can see that it's 0.62, but I'm rounding up that, and 1 is fine. On to the next item. Now, tons, because steel is quite expensive, we usually round steel up to 2 decimal places, or not round it up, but bring it to 2 decimal places rather than a whole number, pretty much for every other quantity. My steel there, you'll see, is weight, and it is in as a secondary quantity, which I put in when I measured it. So again, same thing, drag and drop it over and release. This time around, I'm going to drop it down as a weight measurement. So I'm not going to leave the volume there because That's not going to work. I've already got my weight in as a secondary quantity. I'm going to click it, click update. So when it goes, you think it's 0. It's not. It's just rounding down. I'm going to just double click my decimal places up here. So 0.16. Now, if you were to take a quick look at what you did with Faker, you'll see that that reinforcement is 0.07 of a ton. Why is that? Well, you assumed that are allowed 100 kg per meter cubed as a kind of, I suppose, a calculation of steel within 1 meter cubed of concrete. We assumed something different, unbeknownst to me at the time when I was measuring it. Faker assumed 100, I actually assumed 250. So a little bit of a disparity there, but don't worry too much. The logic is the same. You can go back and change that if you wanted it to 100 in the calculation, and it would bring that down. But for what we need, it's okay for the moment. Formwork, same item again. So I was able to populate 3 items now. This time, drop down custom quantity formwork, which I set up at the time when I did this. In it goes 9 meters squared. Moving on now to the sills. We've got a 1785 millimeter long sill, and we've got a 2200 millimeter long sill. So these are the sills, obviously, to the windows. If you're to quickly look at where they are, look at the elevations. Obviously, there's a sill there. Now, I think Faker's assuming 200 millimeters either side of that 1385. It could be 150. I think he's been safe assuming 200. Usually it's about 150 either side. So in doing so, that 1385 plus 200 this side plus 200 this side is 1785. So the 1385 window width has a sill of 1785, and the 1800 width would have a sill of 2200 millimeters. So that's pretty straightforward. Now I can't drag and drop and just drop it in there because there's a number of different items there with different heights, or different windows with different heights. So I need to double click in to the quantity to get into the sheet below. And then what I'm doing is I'm going to select each one. Well, I could do one by one. Let's say window 1, drop it in. So there's 4 of those windows. That's okay. And then there's 4 of those windows. Now, why am I selecting those particular windows? Well, because these are the 1385 width. Obviously 200 either side. So that brings me to the 1785 long. So there's 8 of those windows, I believe. I'll come back out. And then the sills of the larger window, because there's only 1 of those, I can just drop it straight in. I don't have to go into the sheet behind. So release. So I've got 9 windows in total, don't I? 4 on the bottom floor, 4 on the top floor, and 1 extra to the side of it on the top floor, that larger window. Steps, well, this is the threshold concrete step to, I believe, the doors. So let's take a quick look at that. You'll see it on the section. Scroll down. There it is there. So you can look back as well and just see what you measured. There's your sills, there's your larger sill, and there's those steps. If you wanted to kind of flick back and forth, just to kind of give you a heads up. So this is 1/800 millimeter wide. The step doesn't work the same way. It doesn't extend either side. It pretty much just goes the width of the door. That description is in there for you already. You won't see these notes. Obviously, when you brought it in, that's just for me as I go through it as a heads up to remember exactly what I need to measure. So I'm going to double click in to the steps. I'm going to bring those 3 steel doors in, update, and I'm going to bring that glazed door. So it doesn't matter whether it's a steel door or a glazed door, it'll still get a step. They're in as counts, that's okay. So there we have 4 doors there, and that's that. So moving on down, copings. Well, if you can remember, that's the parapet. If I scroll out, so at the very top of the parapet, all around the perimeter of the building, I've got this kind of cap. If I want to get a measurement for that, I could actually get the center line, but I've already measured, unbeknownst to myself, forming cavities, which is 416 meters squared, which is the total area of forming the cavity from the ground floor level, all the way up to the underside of that cap. Well, as well as it being 416 meters squared, I've also got a length in there, and the length of that is the perimeter length. If you wanted to see it, just click on the ground floor's first 4 plans, click in your forming cavities, and there it is there. There's your total length if you want to hover over it all the way around the building. So I don't need to go and measure it again. I'm trying to use as little measurement as possible, or try to use as many of these measurements as possible to populate my bill of quantities. That's the skill of the quantity surveyor. So because that's in there, I suppose, as a secondary quantity, I drag and drop it straight in. Drop it down, instead of a wall area, drop it down as a length. So click update. Okay, 58 meters squared. On we go onto brickwork, blockwork. First item we have is the facing brick at 100 millimeters thick. Well, they're saying 102 here, but they must be counting a bit of mortar or something on the side. Brick is usually 100 millimeters thick. Okay, so we have the area of our brickwork. You'll see it there in the exterior walls. We've got brickwork on the ground floor of 81, brickwork on the first floor of 135, and then we obviously have to deduct our walls. So just take a quick look. So there we've got a brick facade on the north elevation. We've got a brick facade in the east elevation. Now this is the exterior brick facade of the exterior leaf or outer leaf. The other two elevations are rendered. Okay, so they're the ones we need to deduct. We need to deduct out the opes that are all here. So what we've got all the windows and doors, I suppose, in that elevation. The only ope we don't have to deduct is that particular one there. So the steel door that's on the south elevation. So every ope has to come out except for that steel door in terms of the deduction of opes for our brickwork. So let's just quickly click that. Let's double click into our walls quantity just to get into the sheet behind, because we're going to have to build up quants here. Let's select our brickwork, 100 millimeter brickwork to the ground floor, control, click our 100 millimeter brickwork to highlight them both together, and drag and drop them across, drop them into the length. It doesn't really matter what column you actually drop them in here, because I'm taking them as a unit. It's not length, obviously. It's actually the wall area. You can see it there as a formula. Get the wall area. So just be conscious of that. You're not actually multiplying it by a width or a height, because I've dragged straight over in the actual wall area. But as I said, I have to deduct out my opes. So scroll down to your opes. I'm going to take every single one of them, because as I said, it's every single type of door and window I'm deducting out, except for one of these steel doors, which I'll get to in a second. Drag and drop it over. Drop those 5 items. Now you can do them one by one, but I'm going to take the 5 of them together. It's going to take a little bit of time maybe, and that's them in as a count. But obviously I don't want a count, I want the area. So to get the area, I'm going to multiply them by their width times their height. So 1.575 is obviously 1575 millimeters. 1.385, 1.385, 1.8, 1.8, and then do the same here, 1.575 and 1.5. So 4 times the actual ope size, width by height, 2.26, convert that, and again 2.26 for the steel doors. Okay, so that last one there, the 1.8 by 2.26, that steel door there, as I said, there's not 3 of them, there's only 2 of them in the brick facade. So I'm just going to change that to 2 by just typing over it. Now, there's no live link between the 2. The green signifies that I've dragged and dropped over. There's a formula in there that pretty much comes with the drag and drop. But this one has no formula, I just put it in, and that's okay. So, as you can see there, I might highlight them. Doesn't really matter, bring them out at 2 decimal places just to see. As you can see there, they're adding my doors to my total area, which isn't the case, so I need to put in -1 in my factor. I'll just change them to a negative. So handy little way of getting a negative deduct in your quant, or you could just select one of these, maybe -2 doors, -1 doors. So put a minus somewhere in the calculation and you'll change all those to a deduct. So you can correspond or compare that. I got 184 meters squared. Not sure what's in here. If I scroll down, slightly different, but we're okay with that. What's a couple of meters squared between good quantity surveyors. Okay, so come out of that now, and I've got 184 meters squared of brickwork. I'm not going to worry about the flush bands. You can figure that out for yourselves by measuring the, I suppose, the soldier brickwork above those windows. Essentially, it's just the total length of the windows and doors in the brickwork. You can do that by basically copying what you've done here into the flush bands, and rather than being an area, just use the lengths of the windows. I'm going to scroll down now to 100mm block work. A little bit different here, because let's look at the 100mm block work. We've obviously got 100 block work and 2 and 5 block work. Worth taking a quick look at the dimensions again, rather than the elevations. Let's look at the ground floor, first floor plans. Let's have a look at the exterior walls. Okay, so what we got going on here, we've got around certain perimeter, certain elevations, we've got 2 blockwork walls, the outer leaf and the inner leaf, and they're both 100. But around here, around this corner, so this elevation and this elevation, we've got a brickwork outer facade and a blockwork 2 and 5 inner. Okay, so just be conscious of that. But that changes again going up here. We've got the brickwork and 100mm, so it's a little bit complicated. What's brickwork, what's blockwork, figuring out what OPEs to deduct. Now, we calculated it in terms of our total area, but we need to deduct out our openings. And that's why I have a little heads up what needs to be deducted there for me. So in the 100mm walls, I'm saying here to myself, deduct the upper floor windows and deduct 2 of the steel doors. And then 1 steel door is getting deducted twice because there's 2 leaves to deduct. If you wanted to see exactly what you're kind of trying to figure out here, click both the ground brick, there's the brick blockwork, 100 blockwork, 100 blockwork. So what we need to deduct out is that door, obviously, on the internal side. This door gets deducted twice because it's got two leaves to deduct. This door once. And then on the first floor, all our OPEs need to be deducted. Okay, so that's what we're kind of trying to figure out, and that's what's tricky about this one. So my upper floors, or my upper floor windows, is the first thing. Well, actually the first thing I need to do is bring over my walls. So there they are, already selected. Drag and drop them over. So the 100mm blockwork on the ground floor and the 100 blockwork on the first floor. Take them in as a wall area. Click OK. Now let's bring over our windows. So those 2, the taller windows are the upper floor ones. So that particular one is on the upper floor, which has a 100mm block inner leaf. And this one has a 100mm block inner leaf. So drag and drop those windows over. Take them as a count, that's fine. Now I 2 spaces, but you don't have to have 2 spaces between them, that's fine. What else do we need to drag? My steel doors, as I was saying, drag and drop them over and click update. Now there's 1 steel door that has 2 leaves to deduct out, so I actually could change that to 4 or just add another one in here. So I could copy, paste just here, and then add that other leaf. 3 steel doors are deducting out of the inner leaf, and then 1 of the steel doors is actually deducting out the outer leaf as well. So that's what you did with Faker. There's nothing I'm telling you that you're doing different here than what you did with Faker. So let's deduct out those by putting in their dimensions. 1.8. 1.575, 1.8 by 2.26, 1.8 by 2.26. So as I said, it's the upper windows, the 4 upper windows, sorry, the 5 upper windows, and then the 3 steel doors, but one of them is measured twice. Minus 1 in there just to change it to a negative. Okay, so happy enough with that. That's reduced that to 582. It could be slightly different depending on how you did it with what you did with Faker. For the most part, it should be okay. Come out of that, and then we're going to measure the 2 and 5 thick block wall. So double click into that and scroll back up and these are the last walls we need to measure. So it's just this 2 and 5 block work on the ground floor. Release it in there. We don't have any other. Click update. There we go. Scroll down, and I believe these doors, these are the ground floor doors, or sorry, windows. And then we got this glazed unit. So that 2 and 5 block work is on the inside face of the corner where the reception and the kind of core is there. And it's only one leaf. So I'm only going to deduct one opening as such, rather than two opes. Okay, so there we go. And 1.385 by 1.5 high to deduct out the ope. And then the same goes 1.8 by 2.26. Okay, so there I have it. I've deducted out those opes. I can, if you want, it doesn't really matter, bring those decimal places out just to see it if you wanted it. With a few decimal places, but it doesn't matter. It's rounding them up, but it's not actually rounding them up in the calc. So 49 meters squared. Is that what we're kind of at here now? You could double check if you wanted it. Scroll down, 2 and 5. Well, there's something significantly different there. 18 meters squared. I wonder what's going on. Oh, you know what I did? Mistake. Double click in. I forgot to -1. Good idea. I double checked. So I got 25 meters squared. Slightly different than what you had in the other one, but maybe I forgot something. But either way, it's giving you an idea of what you need to do. Bonding to other work. Don't worry about that for the purposes of this. Forming cavities, I've already got that measured. There it is there, 416. I can take it as is and drop it in. Actually, I can't because I will need to deduct out all my opes. So I'll need to go in, double click, forming cavities into length, click update, and I'm going to have to deduct out my opes. So my steel doors, my glazed doors, and my 3 windows. All have to come out, drop it in, and then width 1.8. Okay, so obviously when you're forming opes, just like the walls, you also want to deduct out your opes. And in doing so, I'm not going to forget this time, I need to put the -1 in there. Obviously, it'll just add to it. I could just right click, copy, Control V is paste. So -1's got in there. So forming cavities, 416, deduct out all my windows and doors, and let's bring me to 380. I wonder how does that correspond. I'm probably getting them all wrong here. We're pretty close. 380, 381. So there might be a couple of things I'm actually assuming differently to what Figure did when he did the manual measurement. But for the most part, I think our quants are fairly accurate. Alright, let's start going through closing cavities. So where are we closing cavities? If we're utilizing these descriptions, we're closing cavities at jams. So we obviously have formed an ope, and we need to actually close that particular ope with a cavity closer, some insulation and some DPC. And in this particular description, we've got the wall ties, we've got the vertical insulation, and we've got the closer block itself at the jams and at the window sills. So let's take a quick look at where that is. If I zoom in maybe on one of the jams, it's not showing the detail here, but there you can see the cavity closer to form that jam. The jam is the side of the windows. In between that cavity closer and that next brickwork outer leaf is some insulation and actually a bit of DPC, which I think is measured separately. And then the sill, we'll probably see in a section here, hopefully. Oh yeah, there it is. So there's the sill there, and there'll be some sort of kind of slate closer across there, although it's not shown in this detail. And some DPC, which is measured separately, that will be dressed up. Obviously there's insulation, which continues up there at probably about 50 millimeters wide. So that's in the description, and we're measuring it per meter. So quite simply, I need to get the total length of my jambs, because the actual description encompasses exactly what's in that jamb per meter. So I can double click in. What I need to do is take all my windows and doors, as far as I remember, bring them in there as a count or length, into the length column or count column, doesn't really matter. So there we have it. There's all. Now we're going to have both sides, so I can, the factor or the count, I can multiply it by 2 in each window or door, and it's the height I'm looking for. Okay, so 2 times 1 times the height, and the height is 1.75, 1.575. And the next one, same, 1.575, and 1.5. These are the ones on the ground floor, and the last 2 are my doors, so they're going to be 2.26 and 2.26. Okay, so happy enough there. That should be my total length, 46 meters of my jambs. Happy. And my window sills, double click into those. Window sills, I'm taking windows, not the doors, just the windows. So there they are. So drag and drop that over. Drop it in there. Click OK. It's not both sides this time around, it's just at the bottom. The head will be measured separately. And the width, 1.8 of that window, rather than the height, 1.385. 1.385. Okay, so happy enough with that. Come back out. The total length of my windowsills is 13 meters. How does that compare to what's going on here? 45 and 16, so slightly different. I might be making a mistake there. I might have missed something. Oh, I did miss something, because I needed to add 100 or 200 to each side of those windows. That's what I needed to do. Alright, so let's maybe do that. Double clicked in. Instead of 1.8, let's add, let's make it 200 either side, 2.2. And 200 either side, because I'm extending that, I suppose, that cavity closer right to the either side, like I did when I measured my sill itself. What's the next one? 1.875 or 400. Yeah, on the 1.3, 1.785. Because I'm adding 200 either side of that 1.385 and 1.785. Okay, so it's increased it more like what's there, 16, 17. Baker might have assumed 300 millimeters on either side, which I think he did, or 150. And that one I got right. So that's okay, thereabouts. If you've assumed 200 millimeters on each side, or 150 millimeters on each side, doesn't make much of a difference. The difference there is 1 meter in total. The damp-proof courses, well, this is essentially, if I go back to my ground floor plan, zoom in again on that, I suppose, jamb detail. There's a DPC that's not in the description for the cavity closer, that goes in between, I suppose, the insulation that is here and that cavity closer, and kind of runs in behind the frame of the window there. So that's need to be taken account, but we've measured it already up here. So I can take that 46, Control C, or right click, copy, and paste it straight in there. Okay, so that's that. Then we got the damp-proof courses to the sills. So what's going on there? Well, if I click my dimension view and go back to my section, have a quick look at my detail of my windowsill. You can't see it there, but there'll be DPC underneath that sill. It'll come across the opening there from the brick outer facade. It'll come up, dress up, and across. So it's going to be over that 225mm threshold, which is measured per meter, because it's greater than 225 wide, because it's coming across the whole cavity. In fact, it'll probably be about 400 or 500mm. It's got to be measured per meter squared. Okay, so that's why you have a difference. Now, you'll probably start realizing when you're measuring external walls and internal walls, it's these little items in the bill of quantities that can be very time consuming. Even from a cost point of view, they're not a whole lot, but they're the details, and they actually what makes up the time. If you were doing a cost plan, you probably wouldn't have to measure them. You'd be calculating forming openings per number and putting the actual composite rate in there. But this has to be measured here. So it's at the sills. You can see it there, sills, and it's stepped. It's greater than 225, so it's got to be measured as meter squared. Whereas DPC at the window jambs is less than 225 wide. That's why you can measure it per meter. So let's go in there. The ground floor of a note there, if I actually go back to what you did with FICRA, the ground floor, which is wider with the 215, that actually should be swapped there. The 215 inner leaf and the 100mm brickwork outer leaf is going to have, I suppose, a deeper or longer girth to its DPC than the first floor ones that have 200mm brick and block leaves. So just be conscious of that. I think you measure 0.55 with the ground floor ones and 0.45 or 44 with the first floor sills. So I'm just going to try and remember that. So I'm going to take in my, starting with my first floor ones. So there's my 2 first floor windows. Drag and drop them over. That's a count. And it's going to be my width of 1.385. But let's bring our DPC into either side. So let's take that at 1. As I done before, 785. Which essentially is the width of my window plus 200mm either side, and then I'm saying it's going to be 0.44 wide. Okay, so trying to get the length of my windows, total length of my windows with the overlap, times the width to get my area, and then this one 2.2 because 200mm either side, and then 0.44. So there are the upper floor windows, and the windows on the ground floor, just those 4 there. Drag and drop them over. Click update. As you can see, this can kind of get a little bit complicated when you start getting into the details. 785, but you can do this, you can do anything. And what did I say on the bottom floor? Because it's got a thicker outer leaf or inner leaf of 215, 0.55. So I'm just doing what you did with FICRA. Again, if you wanted to show that in decimal places, it won't make a difference, but if you did. The total area of my DPM, or DPC there, is 9 meters squared. Okay, what do we got going on next? We've got the cavity trays. So what's going on with the cavity trays? Well, if you want to flick back to what you did with FICRA, it's this cavity tray or DPC dressed up over the Catholic lintel on the first floor, because they're 200mm, or sorry, two leaves with 100mm, so that because they're the outer floor ones. Are the upper floor ones, and these ones are the ones with the beam on the ground floor. So that step of DPC is a little bit more in terms of its girth. And then we got the cavity tray that's at the parapet. So again, as you can see, a little bit more detail. So what we got first is the narrower of the two, the one that's 575 girth. So if I double clicked into that, that's the first floor windows and doors. And why have I got something different here? Oh, well, we'll go with it. Then what I have here, what was it? 575 and 740. I should probably change that. 575. That's 740, and that one is 745. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. Let's go with what's here. Double click in. First floor windows and doors, and the narrower ones on the first floor, I believe, these two. They're the windows on the first floor. Take them as a count. Take them into either side, so that would be 2.2 wide because it's 200 millimeters either side, and to bring it to the sides of the windows, and then as I said 1.785 on that side. So that should be good enough. It's the head. I think that's okay for that. If I come back out, yep, 10 meters. And then the next one is my ground floor windows and doors. That would be that one. Glazed doors and the steel doors all have, I suppose, that DPC count. Okay, there we go. And the width 1.785. 2.2. I'm trying to get the lengths of these things because I have the counts, multiply them by their width, 2.2. And come out. So that says 16. Now and this one is the parapet. I'll drop it in there as my length. And then the last couple items, don't worry about the design joints. The lintels, how many of those we have. By double clicking the 1785 ones, that's going to be the windows that are that length. So 4 of those. Why are they 1785? Because we got 200 either side. For measuring those. And how many lintels do we have over our windows and doors that are 200? Well, we got that one, that one, and that one. Bring them over. Okay, so 8 of those, 5 of those. Now I'm just going to scroll back up to what I got going on here. I'm not entirely happy with this because some of the steel doors, if you look at what's going on the ground floor, not all the steel doors will have the larger girth in terms of their head, because they're in 2 and 5, even though we're on the ground floor. 1, 2, the 3 doors there, those 3 particular doors should have a different width, but we'll leave it for the moment. I think I followed what Faker did there, and for all intents and purposes, in terms of cost, it's not going to make much of a difference. But if you want to be really accurate, there's some slight changes there that has to be made. But for the most part, you know, there was the odd item here and there that you might manually have to put in. We pretty much got everything we needed to get. And there's one more thing I want to show you, and that is if you went and deducted your OPEs prior to measuring, which means that you wouldn't have to deduct out your windows and doors. So let's select, let's say, let's do maybe one of the first ones here. Let's do this brickwork. Okay, rather than, I'm going to double click in here, rather than I have done this, I'm going to delete that. And let's say prior to actually, in my takeoff, I had actually calculated the deduct out prior to bringing it in. So let's do that. So clicking on my brickwork, or coming back to my dimension view, starting with the ground floor brickwork. Where is it here? Now you can do this for each one of these, but I'm just going to show you an example of what you could do here. 100mm brickwork ground floor, and there we go. Where's my brickwork? There it is. Now what I want to do is I want to deduct out all these OPEs. Okay, now I want to see the height again, maybe in the elevations, just to make sure I've got the right heights. So my windows are, let's say, 1650 on the upper floor and 1575 on the ground floor. Now they could be slightly smaller if you wanted it, not deduct out that, but I'll leave it up to yourselves which height you want to take. And then we got the 2.26. Okay, so let's try that. Let's go with clicking on my first floor or my ground floor. Let's make a deduct here. So what I need to do is click dimensions, starting with deducting out this OPE here, this door OPE. So what I need to do is click negative. Now make sure I'm on the right quant. I am, because that's showing up. I need to click negative, although it disappears now. Use point mode. I'm going to click from there to there. Okay. This one from there to there. Then I've also got my window, which will be a different height. We'll get to that in a second. From there to there. And this next window from there to there. And then from there to there. From there to there. And do I have a door down here? I do. In my brickwork. From there to there. Okay, so I've deducted out the lines, but the problem is the height is incorrect. The height is still at the total height of the wall, which is 2.7, which is not the case. So I need to deduct out the appropriate height. I can't remember exactly what the heights are. Let's just double check. On the ground floor, let's take the 1.575. That's okay. Or if you wanted to be a little more accurate in terms of deduct, it probably is because I'm going to have my sill there as an opening as well. So do take the 1.75 and the 2.26. So going back to my plans here, clicking on the actual deduct, click on dimensions to show the actual dimensions. Okay, so I'm in the dimension groups. I clicked on what I measured here and the deducts. I know that my heights are incorrect, so let's go into dimensions and have a look at them individually. So you might have to click that. So there's all my individual dimensions. There's my deducts. See the height there, 2.7. If you don't see a height column, you might have to click this little snowflake and check height. But I have it in there. Now, so this one, the first one, that's a door. How do I know that? Because it's turned blue, I know it's a door. I'm going to right click. I'm going to say change height. And I'm going to change it to 2.26. Okay, so click OK and it's changed. The next one is another door. I'm going to right click, change height, 2.26. Click OK. Then we've got one. I'm going to control 2, 3, 4 windows, right click all 4 together, change height. What did I say? 1.575 as a deduct. Okay. And then I'm going to click the last one, which is a door, and that needs to change height 2.26. 2.26. Click OK. Okay, so I'm happy enough with that. They've got my right heights in there, and then my walls, etc. So if I click back, and even go to dimensions and click see both. Well, I'm seeing both together. Now I've got brickwork, so that's fine, 60 meters squared. I've got brickwork on the first floor, so I've got the brickwork here, and I also need to do a negative dimension for these ones. So I've got here. I've got here. Got here. So on the first floor, do I have any other deducts of the brickwork? I don't. But I certainly have to change, just to double check, I certainly have to change the height of those deducts. So just to double check what the heights of those windows are. If I scroll up, 1.65 is the height. So let's go back. Ground floor, first floor plan, or ground floor plans. On first floor plans, the actual first floor dimension. Click on dimensions. Click on the little, see them down there. Where's my negatives? There they are. And all my negatives, instead of 4.51, which is a fairly high wall on that first floor, I'm going to deduct and right click. Change the height. Now there's another way you can change the height in these. You can double click them. In the dimension properties, you can uncheck use default here, 4.51, and type in a dimension there. But you've got to uncheck that. I find it easier just to do them together. Hold, control, click, right click. And what height did I say? 1.65. And click OK. So I've changed all those negative dimensions from a height of whatever they were, 4.51 is default, to 1.65. So when I come back out of there, that's my total wall area. Now, so I'll leave it up to yourselves what way you kind of can do that. Obviously, you'll have to do it as deducts then for your block work and your 2 and 5 block work. I'm not going to show you all those as well, but if I recalculate that workbook, actually it's changed them already. There they go. They're changed with the deducts. Whereas the last time I was in there, it was a little bit higher. So it's now taken because there's a live link between there and there. Once this changes, that changes. And when I come out, I get 183. I think I had 184 there. I can't remember exactly what it was, but that is my total wall area without having to do the deducts here in terms of number. I already had done it in the actual dimensions. So you can do it either way. You can measure true opes when you're doing the actual dimension takeoff, and then you can deduct them out here, or you can actually deduct them out with negative dimensions and then just drag and drop them over. The problem is you still have to measure your opes because you're going to have to use it to close cavities, to measure the windows, etc. So that is, that's a fairly difficult little task there with the exterior walls and the utilization of your dimensions. As you can see, there's one thing doing measurement. There's another thing actually utilizing that measurement in your bill of quantities, knowing the measurement rules, what's greater than 225, what's less than 225, etc. I assume that you've done all this with FICRA and how you construct those, descriptions with measurement rules, and then we're just using it as a template. For the most part, that's what you'll be doing out in the workplace. You won't necessarily be having to construct these descriptions from scratch. You'll be given them with a template, and there may be some manipulation in terms of widths and heights, etc. But for the most part, you'll have to use your measurement to populate your bill of quantities. So we'll leave it at that for today. That's a good bit, a fairly long video for you. It might take you a couple of days to work through that, or, well, guts of a day to work through that, and by all means, give it a go. We have got some other elements that I'll do in a different video, but if you can do these external walls, and the substructure which you've done before, you can pretty much populate any BOQ item. So all the best with that, and don't forget to export it if you want to keep a copy of each iteration, each cycle. All right, thank you.